And we are recording. I'm going to share the screen. All right. And here we go. Welcome back to Parsha Unpacked. We have a great Parsha this week. Actually, this week begins a very, very well-known story, which we're going to get into and we're going to discuss. But before we do, I just want to take an opportunity to share with everybody that tonight's class is being dedicated by Bruce Raffleson in memory of his beloved grandparents, Joseph Raffleson and Gertrude Rabinovitz. And that is why we have the special merit of having Alan on the call tonight. So we want to just say that your grandparents, Bruce and Alan, your parents should have tremendous nachas from seeing 3 generations learning Torah tonight and the merit of their souls, and their souls should have an aliyah in Shemayim, and you should continue to grow and give them tremendous nachas.
Thanks, Rabbi. Just a correction. They're my great-grandparents.
Oh, great-grandparents.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
your father's grandparents.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Okay, I missed that. That's even more amazing. Wow. Okay. That's really special. Where do they live? Do they live in Highland Park?
They lived in Brooklyn by way of Dvinsk, Russia.
Wow. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, so tonight, I'll tell you what our biggest challenge is. The biggest challenge that we have tonight as we approach the story of Joseph and his brothers is this. Okay. Come on, let's get on. Okay. So that's the biggest problem we have, our biggest challenge that we have tonight, because we all know this story, or I should say we all think we know this story. But the problem is that the rendition, the Donny Osmond Hollywood rendition, is not quite the exact story as we're going to unfold and unpack it tonight. So what I want you to do, first of all, is forget everything that you remember from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and stick with me and see if we can find a new spin on this story. So the Parsha starts off, first of all, it says, Vayeshev Yaakov, Yaakov dwelled, the Vayeshev Yaakov. And the commentaries point out that the word Vayeshev means that Yaakov, what Jacob was looking for at this late stage in his life, was just a little tranquility. He was looking to retire, just to have a little bit of it, take it easy. It had a difficult life, a long life, a challenging life, from running away from his brother and spending 20 years with Lavan and coming back to the land, all the challenges that he had. Now he's looking for a little bit of peace and tranquility. He wanted to retire, just wanted to retire. And what happened? Immediately, the worst chapter in his life, not the worst, but the hardest, the most challenging, difficult chapter in his life begins. And I think the message right off the bat is that, we never stop growing. As Jews, we understand that you can be 21 or you could be 91, and there's never a day, as long as we're on this earth, where we stop trying to grow and experience and become better people and grow and learn from our experiences. So Yaakov tries to retire and fade away into the sunset, sail away to the sunset, but it's not going to happen. Now is going to begin the hardest chapter of his life. So the story is that Jacob and Rachel have a son, and his name is Joseph. Joseph is a Ben Zekunim. He is the child of Jacob's old age. Okay, and he loves him very much, and he loved him, in fact, more than all the other brothers. And as a result of that, and because of that love that he had for him, he made him an ornamented tunic, a ketonet pasim. Okay, and now right away, we have to ask the question, why would Jacob play favorites with his sons? We all know that is not a wise thing to do. Those of us who have children know that you never want to play favorites with your children, or those of us who are teachers who have people in our lives, you don't favor one over another. And in fact, the Talmud actually says and calls Jacob to task for this, that Rava bar Mechasia said, that Rav Chama bar Guria said, that Rav said, what did they say already? A person should never distinguish one of his sons from among the other sons by giving him preferential treatment, as due to the weight of 2 sela of fine wool that Jacob gave to Joseph beyond what he gave to the rest of his sons in making him the striped coat. His brothers became jealous of him, and the matter unfolded, and our forefathers descended to Egypt. Okay, do you understand what the Medrash is saying? The Medrash is basically putting the blame of 210 years of Egyptian slavery and bondage on Jacob for favoring one brother over the other, or one son over the other. And he gave him this striped coat that was only worth a little bit more, but that was it. And that was how this whole process began. So we found out about Joseph very early on that he's into dreams. Okay, so he says, I have a dream, his first dream, he said to his brothers, hear this dream which I have dreamed. Okay, this is dream number 1. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, when suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright, when your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf. His brothers answered, do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us? And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. They were already angry at him because he had been reporting their actions and their activities that weren't so perfect and ideal to his father. And now they hate him even more because he has this dream. And in this dream, he's clearly dreaming of dominating over them. Okay, and then he has another dream. That's dream number 1. Then he has dream number 2. He dreamed another dream and told it to his brother, saying, look, I've had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon, the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And when he took it to his father and brothers, his father berated him. What? He said, is this the dream you have dreamed? Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to the ground, bow low to you to the ground? So you see that everyone is realizing at this moment that Joseph's dreams are indicative of his visions of grandeur. That somehow he sees himself as dominating or ruling over his brothers and his father. Now, here's a question. Joseph is a wise person. In fact, Onkelos, the commentary, the Aramaic translation of the Torah, which you find inside every Chumash, translates the word Ben Zekunim, which Rashi and others translate as a son of his old age. He translates that as Bar Chakim, a wise son. He was his wisest son. Joseph was the smartest. He was the wisest. He was the most learned. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a genius of any sort or somebody with major emotional intelligence to realize that if you have a dream like this, keep it to yourself. And if you have the dream once and the brothers get really angry at you because they catch on that you're in your dream, you're dominating over them, then certainly don't tell them the second dream, which is just going to stoke their envy and their ire and make them even more envious of you. So why exactly is Joseph sharing these dreams? Now, the brothers decide that enough is enough, and they feel that Joseph is plotting to usurp all the power of the family, to push them out. I think they feel that what Joseph is trying to do is to get the brothers, to get Jacob to curse his other sons, his 10 other sons, or 11 other sons perhaps, and to curse the other sons. And they feel that they genuinely are being threatened by him. They feel that he's a threat to their existence and that he's trying to become the sole heir to the patriarchal lineage. And they decide that they have no choice but to create a Beit Din, a rabbinical court, and they do, and they rule and judge him as a rodef. A rodef is somebody who has the halachic status, because a rodef means that he's trying to kill them. He's trying to pursue them to do harm. And a rodef has the halachic status of you're allowed to kill them before they kill you. So they determined that Joseph is a rodef, and they've decided that they're going to punish him appropriately. Okay. The next thing that happens is Jacob sends Joseph to go check on the welfare of his brothers. That is a weird move, because Jacob fully understands how much these brothers hate their brother Joseph, and he gets it, and he knows that when he sends Joseph off to check on the brothers, that he's putting him into a majorly dangerous situation. So the question is, why on earth would Jacob ever send Joseph to go check alone by himself? Go check on your brothers, the brothers that want to kill you, the brothers that want to destroy you, the brothers that have determined that you're a rodef. Why would Jacob, who loves his son Joseph so much, send him off in that way? Okay, keep these questions in mind as we go forward, because we're going to try to unravel this whole thing. So Joseph shows up, and the brothers see him. And right away they decide, oh, you know what? It's Beshert. We just judged him as a dangerous person, and now he's here. We're going to kill him. We've decided that he's got to go. We're going to kill him. And Reuven says, whoa. Hold on. Shed no blood. Cast him into that pit out in the wilderness, but don't touch him with yourselves. And his intention was that he was going to come back later and save Joseph from the pit. Okay, Joseph came to his brothers. They stripped Joseph of his tunic, the ornamented tunic that he was wearing, and they took him and they cast him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. If the pit was empty, don't I already know that there was no water in it? Doesn't empty mean nothing was in it? So why does the Torah say the pit was empty, there's no water in it? Good question. The Talmud wonders this very same question, and Rashi quotes the Talmud in Tractate Shabbat. And the pit was empty, there was no water in it. Since it says the pit was empty, do I not know that there was no water in it? What then is the force of there was no water in it? Why does the Torah need to say that? So the Talmud derives from here, water indeed it did not contain, but there were serpents and scorpions in it. Okay, so let's go back. Reuven says, let's not kill Joseph. Can't kill Joseph. No. Why should we kill him? Let's just throw him into that pit filled with snakes and scorpions. Remember Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, right? Throw him in the pit, and that's gonna save him? No, if he's thrown into a pit with snakes and scorpions, he's gonna die in 2 seconds. So that's another question. What's going on over there? What was the purpose of throwing him into the pit? Okay, meanwhile, Reuven goes away to take care of his father's sheep, and the other brothers are sitting around, and they see a caravan coming of Yishmaelim, of Arabs. And they decide, you know what, we don't want him to die. We don't want to kill him, and we can make a few bucks. So they pull him out of the pit and they sell them to the Ishmaelim for 20 silver pieces. They take his garment, this striped garment, the famous Technicolor dream coat, and they dip it into blood and they send it to their father Jacob, and they say, Jacob, do you know whose coat this is? And Jacob, of course, recognizes it, and he goes into a deep state of mourning. He says, I will mourn to the grave. It's very interesting, by the way. On Passover night, we recall this story. How do we recall this story? So there's 2 times on Passover night that we dip, right? How's it go? On every other night, we don't even dip once. On this night, we dip twice. What do we dip on Pesach? We dip the karpas into the salt water, right? And we dip the maror into the charosis. Why do we dip twice on the night of Pesach? Because we're recalling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So how do we get into Egypt? We got into Egypt as a nation with a dipping. What dipping? When the brothers dipped Joseph's coat in the blood. Okay, so the first dipping is dipping karpas, which, by the way, is an acronym for kesonas pasim, which is the Hebrew for striped coat, into the salt water, which is bitter because it reminds us of the bitterness of the slavery, and we go into slavery. And then at the end of the story of Mitzrayim, we dip the hyssop branch into the blood and put it on the doorposts, and that's what signals the end of our period of time, our experience in Egypt. That's symbolized by the dipping of the moror, which is bitter, into the charosis, which is sweet, at the end of the Seder. Okay, so you see the Seder is alluding to this dipping in the beginning of the story. Okay, anyway, that's what happens. Yosef arrives in Egypt, and he is sold to Potiphar, the chief executioner. Okay, and what happens? Potiphar recognizes right away that Joseph is not an ordinary guy, that he's very brilliant, a talented executive, and he puts everything into Joseph's hands, all of his affairs, all the affairs of his household. He makes him the CEO of his household, everything except, of course, his wife. And his wife, the wife of Potiphar, starts seducing Joseph day in and day out, every single day. And Joseph finally, is about to succumb to the temptation when in the window, he looks outside and he sees in the window an image of his father. Obviously, his father wasn't peeping through the window. His father was in the land of Canaan, there in the land of Egypt. But what this idea is, a very important idea, that Joseph was so committed to his father and revered and looked up to his father so much that he carried his father's image with him everywhere he went. And anytime he felt tempted to sell himself short or to compromise his values, he thought about his father, and that's what gave him the encouragement to do the right thing, which is a side point, but that is that we should all have, not only should we have someone in our lives like that we think about in moments of weakness and temptation. What would my father say? What would my grandfather, what would my great-grandparents say if they could see me doing this terrible thing? And that should set us straight. But not only should we have someone like that in our lives, but we should be that person for our children and our grandchildren, so that our grandchildren and children will look at us and think of us in those moments when they feel weak and tempted and say, oh, but what would my Zaidi do here? What would my Zaidi say? Okay, so Yaakov is that image for Joseph, and Joseph manages to avoid the temptation, but she makes up a story about how he attacked her, and he is once again thrown into a pit, the royal dungeon. Okay, when he's in the royal dungeon, again, the head of the prison, the main warden in the prison, also recognizes his talent, his brilliance, his unique executive ability, and he puts him in charge of the prison. Okay, one day there are 2 ministers. You all know the story. There's a minister of the bread, also known as a baker, and there's the minister of the wine, who's also known as a butler, and they're both in prison. And one day he notices them, these two, the butler and the baker, and they look very sad. They look down, and he says to him, and I think this is one of the weirdest sentences in the Torah, one of the strangest biblical questions of all times. What's wrong? Why are you guys, what's with the long face? Why are you guys so down? What? Why are you guys so down? Why the long face? You're in the dungeon. You're in the king's dungeon. You're going to die here. You're going to spend the rest of your life suffering and starving in this dungeon until you die. What do you mean? Why are you so down? Why would anyone be anything but totally depressed and suicidal in such a situation? So we'll come back to that. Okay. Anyway, but they answer the reason why we're so depressed is because we have these dreams. And we've had these recurring dreams, and there's no one who can interpret these dreams for us. So he tells them the dreams, and Joseph interprets the dreams, and he tells the butler, your dream is good news. Your dream means in 3 days' time, you're going to be returned to your former position. And then he tells the baker, yeah, here's not such good news. In 3 days' time, you're going to be put to death by Pharaoh. Okay, and then he tells the butler, he says, by the way, put in a good word for me, if you don't mind, when you see Pharaoh. Now, he says that not only once, but he says it twice. He reminds him right before he leaves. Oh, by the way, don't forget, tell Pharaoh about me. Okay, and the commentaries point out, the Talmud says over here that Joseph, because he said that twice, ended up having to spend an extra 2 years in prison. Now, I was always very bothered by that on many levels. Why in the world is that a bad thing? He's trying to get out of prison, right? And he just did this guy a favor, and now all he's doing is saying, hey, when you see Pharaoh, put in a good word for me. And then he reminds him on his way out. So the commentaries explain the problem was not that he said it once. That was totally appropriate for him to say it once. The problem was that he felt the need to remind him. And the explanation is over here that in life, there's a very fine balance between trusting in Hashem and putting in our effort in anything in life. Everything in life is about that. You know, I can always do a little more. I can always put in a little more effort. But should I? Is it the appropriate thing for me to do? Or is there a point where I should stop back and say, you know what, Hashem is in charge. I'm going to let Hashem do his thing now. I've done my effort. I've put in my work, and now it's up to Hashem. So for most of us, that balance is, you know, what's reasonable? What's a reasonable thing to do? A person's looking for a job. So should I spend 18 hours a day working on sending my resumes into people? No, that's probably too much. Should I spend 15 minutes a day and say Hashem will take care of me? No, that's probably way too little. Somewhere in the middle is the right amount. But it all depends on what level you are on as a spiritual person. For Joseph, who's on an extremely high level, it would have been appropriate for him to mention it once, but to mention it a second time showed a lack of bitachon, a lack of trust in Hashem's ability to run the world. Okay, moving on. 3 days later, it's Pharaoh's birthday. Happy birthday, Paro. Okay, and that's very interesting. It's the only time in the Torah that the idea of a birthday is mentioned. I try to explain this to my wife and kids when I forget their birthdays or whatever, that in Judaism, we don't make such a big deal about birthdays, right? We make a big deal about yard sites, but we don't make a big deal about birthdays. Because what is a birthday celebrating? A birthday is celebrating the day that you set out on your maiden voyage. You know, a ship goes out to sea, and when that ship goes out to sea, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to end up, if it's going to reach its destination or not. So the birthday, that's just the beginning of the story. We don't celebrate birthdays. We celebrate the yard site, because the yard site is when the ship came into sea. It's when it completed its journey. And that's when we know that the person completed their mission in the world. So try that next time. Stan, next time you forget your wife's birthday, I'm picking on you just because I see you on my screen here. Or Steve, next time you forget Melissa's birthday, try that. Just don't quote me on it. Okay. Anyway, what happens? 3 days later, the butler is reinstated. He forgets, by the way, to mention Joseph. Oops. and the baker is hanged just as Joseph predicted. And that is the end of the story for now. It actually goes on a lot more. It goes on a lot more in this week's Parsha. It continues in next week's Parsha and the Parsha after that. It's the single longest story in the entire Torah by far. But we're going to pause here. Okay. Now, what I want to do is I want to kind of review this and look at this with a close eye. And I think if we look at this story very closely, I think we can see an incredible message about how Hashem oversees and manages his world on a macro level and on a micro level. On a macro level, I mean bringing history forward, moving history, advancing the world to where it needs to get to the end game, to the end goal. And on a micro level, involvement in each and every one of our lives. We call that hashgacha klalit and hashgacha pratit. General providence and individual personalized providence. Okay. Let's back up again. Now I just want you to know that we discussed this idea once many years ago, probably at least 5 years ago when we were doing the Biblical Literacy Book Club and we studied the book of Joseph. So if some of you are angry that I'm repeating this, I apologize. But I promise you, when I took it out of my notes, I didn't remember any of it. So if you guys do, that's great. But a little review won't hurt anyway. So let's remind ourselves. So, but backing up, because the story of Joseph really is, and the Joseph going into Egypt is the beginning of a process that the Torah informed us about much earlier in the Torah. What am I referring to? What's the point I'm making? So go back all the way to chapter 15. This is 22 chapters ago in the Torah. Okay, and we remember that Abraham experiences what we refer to as the covenant of the parts. The sun's going down, Abraham falls into a deep sleep, and God says to him, Abraham, he says to Abraham, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation that they serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. Okay, this is God informing Abraham 3 generations earlier that his offspring were going to be strangers in a land not their own and enslaved for 400 years. Okay, this is called the covenant of the parts. And in this conversation, Hashem is informing Abraham not only about the exile of his offspring to Egypt, to Mitzrayim, but about all of the future exiles that the Jewish people would experience for the next 4,000 years. The Egyptian exile, the Babylonian exile, the Greek exile, the Persian exile, the Roman exile that we find ourselves in still to this day. Abraham was given a vision of all of the galus, all of the exiles that the Jewish people were going to experience. That's what is going on over here. And this process is beginning now. The process is beginning with the sale of Joseph. Why? Because Joseph's being sent down to Egypt paves the way for the brothers to come down and eventually for Jacob, their father, to come down. And they end up being there and remaining there for hundreds of years. And the Egyptian slavery and the Egyptian exile begins. What does it begin with? It begins with the story of Joseph going down to Egypt. That is the first chapter in the story of the Egyptian exile. And it's the first chapter in the story of exile that the Jewish people experience for the next 4,000 years. Now, it's very interesting to see how this story unfolds. So one of the, we mentioned this struck us as being quite odd. Israel, and by the way, Israel is the other name for Jacob. Remember last week's Parsha, Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel. Israel says to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing in Shem. Come, I will send you to them. Okay, that's a weird thing to do. Those brothers want to kill him. Jacob knows it. He's putting him into danger. Why is he doing this? And Yosef answers, what does Yosef answer? Hineni, that famous phrase, I'm ready, here I am. It's the same thing that Abraham said when he was sent out to do the binding of his son Isaac. Hineni, I'm here. Okay, fine. And then the Torah says, and he said to him, go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring me back word. Go check on the brothers and come back. And then these words, Vayishlachehu me'emek Chevron vayavo Shechema. And he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he reached Shechem. Okay, let me ask you a question. Who has been to Hebron? Somebody raise your hand if you've been there. Okay, Papa, my father. Kathy, okay. Hey, I think I was there with both of you guys. Okay, do you remember when we stood up on the top of that hill, on the very top of the hill? We climbed up to that. You guys were all like, we got up to the top of that building and we looked down and we saw way down there, we saw the whole area. And we were told by our tour guide that Abraham lived right there. And then we saw under that building, there's some ruins there that was a Bronze Age ruins for the time of Abraham. And that was, the archaeologists figured that was the community, the society where Abraham lived, okay? So were we in a valley or on a mountain at the time? Answer is, we were on a mountain. Hebron was not in a valley. Hebron was the field, the tomb of the patriarchs is in the valley. That's where Ephron the Hittite lived. But Abraham, who lived in Hebron, lived on the top of the mountain. Remember, Steve Andrews? Remember, we were up on the top, right? Up on the top of the mountain. That was Hebron. So the question is, why does it say that he sent him, that Jacob sends him from the valley of Hebron? Hebron was not a valley. Hebron was a mountain. And Rashi, of course, quoting the Medrash, picks up on this. He says, but was not Hebron situated on a hill? Why then does it state that Jacob sent him from the Amek, the valley, the deep part of Hebron? That was not a valley. So here we go. The meaning is that Jacob sent him in order to bring into operation the profound, and in Hebrew, the word for profound is amuka, deep. It's the same word as valley. He didn't send him from the valley of Hebron. He sent him from the profound depth of Hebron. What does it mean? Jacob sent him in order to bring into operation the profound plan of the righteous man who was buried in Hebron, Abraham, in order that there might be fulfilled that which was spoken to Abraham when the covenant was made, namely, thy seed shall be a stranger in the land not their own. Meaning, what's going on over here? Hebron is, don't understand Amek Hebron to mean the valley of Hebron. Understand it to mean the depth of Hebron, meaning the deep, profound plan that was revealed to the one buried in Hebron. Okay, in other words, what Rashi is telling us is that Yaakov, Jacob, or Israel, whether he knew it or not, and that's a good question, whether this was on purpose or knowingly, or maybe not even knowingly, what was going on is that the real reason why he sent Joseph to go check on his brothers was not to go check on his brothers, but was to set into motion the process that was foretold to the one buried in Hebron, Abraham, that your children will be strangers in a land not their own. When he sends him to go me'emek Hebron, from the profound depth of the plan of Abraham and the covenant that was revealed to Abraham, he is now setting into motion this process of the children of Israel going into the land of Egypt, which would eventually lead to the Egyptian bondage and all the other slaveries and bondages too. And the reason why I keep saying that is because the Maharal from Prague explains that they were supposed to go for 400 years into Egypt. Remember, that's what the verse said. God said to Abram, your children will be in a land not their own for 400 years. They weren't there for 400 years. They were there for 210 years. The reason why God took them out early is because they were on the brink of complete obliteration. They were on the 49th level of impurity. Had they remained there for one more moment, they would have disappeared entirely, which is why God had to take them out instantaneously. There wasn't even time for the dough to rise, which is why we eat matzah on Pesach. But because God had to take him out early, and he told Abraham there'd be 400 years of exile, those 190 years had to be made up. And when they're made up, they're not made up in 190 years because that was at the core of the moment. They're made up over periods of thousands of years. So all of the exiles really are a result of this exile. And this process is beginning now with Jacob sending his son Joseph into the valley, the Amukah, the profound depth of the plan that was revealed to the one that was buried in Hebron. Okay. And it has to be, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Why would Jacob send his son, Joseph, the one he loved so much, right into the hands of the brothers who want to kill him? The only answer is that there was a fulfillment of a prophecy going on that was told to Abraham. And in order for that to happen, God had to influence in some way this event to make sure they would take place. Now, this is not the only out of character or strange mistake, or if you want, blunder that is made in this story. You have Jacob sending his son to go check on the brothers who want to kill him. You have Jacob himself playing favorites with his son. Why would he play favorites with his son? He's Yaakov Avinu, should certainly understand that. And we know that. That's a simple thing. We have Joseph making a tremendous mistake by telling his brothers, going around and bragging about his dreams, where clearly in the dreams, he's going to lord over everybody and they're going to bow down to him. And you have the brothers making a mistake by understanding that Joseph is a rodef and that he is meant to be killed and eliminated. So you have these great, huge giants, the giant spiritual giants of the Torah, making mistake after mistake. So what is going on over here? So I'll share with you what I think is the depth of all this. You see, God's got a little problem on his hands. God has a problem. And the problem is like this. There's a macro cog. There's a big wheel, macro wheel that is churning all the time. And that is bringing history from A to B to C to the eventual end game, which is the coming of Mashiach and the time when the whole world will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. That's the end game. And God's got to get history there. The problem with that is that human beings have free will. So how does God make sure that the history moves forward in the direction that he needs it to when we human beings can constantly, using our free will, undermine his process? This God could say, okay, now the next world event that's supposed to happen, it's going to happen is, peace is going to be made between Israel and countries in the Middle East. But if somebody doesn't make that choice and make that happen, then it's not going to happen. Or if somebody decides to, pull out of that deal, then that's not going to happen. So how does God ensure that the necessary steps to move the world forward to the end game take place? So here's one of the ways that this happens. And this is really coming from the Ramban, Nachmanides, that we've mentioned before. So one of the things that God will do when necessary, he doesn't want to remove our free will. That's not possible. That's not the deal. The deal is we have free will and Hashem doesn't tamper with it. But what Hashem will do sometimes is, for a brief fleeting moment, he will cloud our judgment. He will confound us. He will confuse us and take away our clarity of judgment. And in that brief moment of befuddlement, human beings will make choices that are completely out of character. They'll look back on it and they would say to themselves, like Jacob would look back and say, what was I thinking? What was I thinking for 1 second? What was going through my mind to send Jacob to go send Joseph to go check on his brothers? What was I thinking? Or Joseph could say, well, oh my God, what was I thinking to tell the brothers about my dreams? Of course they hate me. Of course they want to kill me. Of course they're going to throw me into a pit and then sell me down to Egypt. Right? So what happens? So God will, for one moment, befuddle and confuse you to the point where you're not yourself and you're not thinking straight, and you'll choose to do something. It's your free will. You're still choosing it. You'll choose to do something which is totally out of character, and you'll look back and you can, for the life of you, you can't understand why you chose to do that. And then what will happen is God will take these strange, out of character decisions that we make and that were made in the moment of confusion and befuddlement, and he'll utilize them to bring about the events that he needs to bring about in order to move history forward from A to B to the end game. Okay. And in this way, God is leading us and the world towards the ultimate destiny that he's leading us to without removing our free will. He confuses us and removes our clarity, but we still make choices. As a result of that, God takes those choices that he needs to bring things forward. Okay. So this is what the Ramban says. We think we're pretty clever and we think that we're really smart and we think that we make plans and our intentions will bear fruit. But in fact, it's always the divine will in the end of the day that prevails. And Nachmanides quotes a beautiful verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs. We say this every day in our daily prayers. Rabos machashavos b'lev ish. Many are the plans, the machinations, the designs in a man's mind. Va'atzas Hashem hisakum. But in the end, it's Hashem's plan that is accomplished. And I've shared with you a little bit before, one of the great Torah commentators, he's known as the Malbim. He wrote a running commentary on almost the entire Tanakh. So he has an explanation of this. I'm going to read it to you. Unfortunately, I didn't find the Hebrew translation of it, but an English translation of it. But here's what he says: Rabos machashavos b'lev ish. This is the quote from Proverbs. Many are the plans or the designs in the heart of man. He says, "Hamachshavos hu masha adam choshev, kol tzadei ha'efshar lahagia al yidei le'ezeh tachlis." The thoughts in the man's heart are all the ideas and the plans and the possibilities that he chooses, that he thinks are going to bring me or bring you to a certain desired goal. The Haim Rabos, and they're abundant, they're many. We're always planning, we're always scheming. What's our next move? What job am I going to take? And who am I going to marry? And where am I going to live? And everything. We think that we're planning and we're making we're choosing our lives and we're in charge. The Haim Belevish, they exist in my heart. Human beings have free will to choose different possibilities. I can go in door A, I can go in door B. I can choose whatever I want in my life. But this doesn't bring us, this is not what brings about the outcome. What brings about the outcome? It's the Ratzon Hashem. It's the desire of Hashem. It's the will of Hashem that's going to prevail. V'hi takum. That is ultimately what's going to prevail. Yes, it's true that we have free will, but Gemar Hamaisa hi tachas hashgacha. But how the event ends up taking place and what ends up happening in the end of the day, that's all under the divine providence. Hashgacha takum v'tibatel habachira. The divine plan will prevail, and if necessary, it will eliminate or override or cancel out our choices. So we make our choices, but Hashem's macro plan is really what's going on. A very simple way of saying this is the old Yiddish phrase, which is "Man tracht und Gott lacht," which means man plans and God laughs. Seymour, I see you have a question. You have to unmute yourself, though, Seymour. Not unmuting. Okay, Seymour, there you go.
Why aren't we satisfied with the explanation that God knows how we're all hardwired, and it doesn't take pulling strings and playing the puppeteer with things on an individual basis?
Because it's true that God knows how we're hardwired, but if I still have free will, then it would seem that I could, with my free will, mess up God's plan, right? God's trying to get something to happen, and I keep making choices.
God knows where we're going to mess up.
That's true, but we still, okay, so you're asking the question, which for some reason always seems to come up almost in every class ever, which is if we have free will and God knows what we're going to do before we do it, then do we really have free will or do we not really have free will? And for that, I'll refer you to a class on the website on that topic. But I don't want to go into that because that'll be the end of the night. We'll get into that and I'll give you 5 reasons, 5 explanations from the Rambam and Rabbeinu Bachai and all these different reasons, and we'll lose track of the whole thing. But suffice to say that we absolutely do have free will, even though God knows how we're going to choose. We have free will, and our free will could override things if it weren't for the fact that it's Hashem's ultimate plan, which is the one that prevails. Okay. So in a befuddled moment, what happens in a moment of confusion, right? What happens? Jacob sends Joseph off to check on his brothers without even realizing that he's setting into motion the unfolding of the promise that God had given to Abraham 2 generations earlier. Okay, the brothers. Okay, fine. Now all of a sudden, the brothers. What do the brothers say? The brothers say, here comes the dreamer. They see him coming. They saw him from afar. Before they came close to him, and they came to conspire to kill him. They said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Come, now let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say a savage beast devoured him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams. Question. We shall see what becomes of his dreams. If we kill him, nothing is going to become of his dreams. His dreams was that he was going to be the ruler, the despot, the king, and we're all going to bow down to him. If we kill him, then we're putting an end to his dreams. So what does it mean? We shall see what comes of his dreams. The Ramban says this was sarcasm. Nachmanides says, we'll see what happens with his dreams in a sort of sarcastic tone. But Rashi says, whoa, absolutely not. We're talking about the tribes, the sons of Jacob over here. This is not sarcasm. This is something else. What's he saying? Well, Rashi says that this is actually these words, we shall see what will become of his dreams, is not the brothers speaking. The brothers say, come, let us kill him. We'll throw him into the pit. We'll say a savage beast devoured him, quote, end quote. It's the Torah, it's God, it's the narrators coming in and saying, we shall see what will become of his dreams. Meaning it's the divine narrator, which is a totally abnormal type of thing in the Torah. We don't normally see God interjecting with his own comments in the Torah. But from the onset, what's going on is Hashem is in the Torah saying, watch what happens. The brothers just said we're going to kill him. We're going to watch together what's going to become of his dreams. Meaning the brothers have their plan, but it's completely not in sync with what's actually going to happen. Watch carefully and you'll learn something fundamental from this story, which is that people make all sorts of plans and schemes, but ultimately what prevails is God's will. The dreams, they were God's communication to Joseph, what his will was. It was God revealing to Joseph what God's plan was. And he gave him this prophecy. And that's what's going to happen. And the brothers think that they're going to kill him. No, we're going to see what's going to become of his dreams. Okay. Now, I think the lesson so far is very important, which is that we have to understand that the will of Hashem is the Ratzon Hashem, God's will is going to prevail 100% of the time. Okay? So the only question as Jews that we should ever really be asking ourselves, and this is very hard, I'm not pretending this is easy, but not what do I want? What career do I want? How do I want to use my talents? Where do I want to live? The real question we should be asking ourselves is one thing and one thing only. What does Hashem want? Was will the Eibishter? What is the will of God? What is the will? What is Hashem's ratzon over here? What does Hashem want from me? Does he want me to do this? Does he want me to do this? Does he want me to stay in Deerfield? Does he want me to move to Israel? What's the will of Hashem? That's the only question we should ever really be asking ourselves. Because you know what? The will of Hashem is what's going to happen in the end anyway. So our goal is to synchronize ourselves with that. What is the will of Hashem? What does Hashem want over here? You know who completely understands that idea? Joseph. Joseph completely understands that. Joseph knows and understands that every single thing that happens is just the unfolding of the divine will. If I'm here at this moment, it's because I need to be here at this moment, and this is supposed to happen to me. If I'm going through this experience, then this is all part of the divine plan, which is why he says to the butler and the baker, why the long face, guys? Why the long face? I mean, excuse me, I'm here in the royal dungeon where I'm going to rot until I die. But Joseph understands, he looks at the world in a different way. He understands that everything is just the playing out of the divine will. So it's just a matter of, knowing that. And once you know that, you always have total equanimity. You always have your peace and your tranquility, because you know that whatever's happening is part of the Ratzon Hashem. Okay, but it goes actually a little bit deeper than this. It's not just that, you have your plan. Let's call it plan A. And it might be, hopefully it's not, and it's not always this way, but it might be that Hashem has the opposite plan. Call it plan Z. Okay? You want A to happen. You want to, get this particular job and move to this particular city. And Hashem has a completely different plan in mind. And it involves you taking a completely different job and moving to a different city and meeting somebody else and marrying someone else and having different children. They're two completely different plans. So it's not just that, okay, God, my plan A, God has plan Z. Plan Z is what's going to happen because that's God's will. That's true, but it's deeper than that. Okay? What happens is that God actually, we see from this very story, that God actually utilizes your choices and your actions that you're doing to bring about your plan A, to carry out your plan, and then he uses those very actions to bring about his plan, which is the opposite plan of the plan that you were acting upon. Okay, and where do we see that in the story? We see it right here. The brothers, what are the brothers trying to do? They're trying to prevent Joseph's dream from coming true. We don't want Joseph to be the king. We don't want to bow down to him. We don't want to be subservient to him. We think that he's trying to usurp the power of the family and to be the fourth patriarch. We got to stop him. We got to eliminate him. We got to kill him. Okay? That's what the brothers are worried about. So what do? Based on this plan A, their plan A is we got to kill Joseph, or we got to get rid of Joseph. We got to eliminate him. So what do? They sell him as a slave to the Ishmaelites, who the Ishmaelites bring him down to Egypt and sell him to Potiphar. And what do they think? We're done. Let's eat shawarma, pita. It says that what did they do right after they sold him? They sat down to eat. They went out for falafel. We did it. We accomplished our goal. We were worried that Joseph was going to take over. And what do? We sold him to the Ishmaelites. He's gone, never to be seen again. And God says, watch what will happen with his dreams. Okay? Watch how I'm going to take the brothers' actions that they did to carry out their plan A and utilize those very actions to carry out my plan, which is the exact opposite of their plan. What happens? Joseph's sold to Potiphar. Comes along, the wife seduces him. He gets thrown into jail. There he meets the butler and the baker. He interprets their dream. A few days later, Pharaoh has a dream. This is the continuation of the story, which we're not going to cover tonight. Pharaoh has a dream. This is the beginning of next week's Parsha. He needs someone to interpret their dream. Joseph is known now as the dream interpreter because the butler remembered him. Okay, and Pharaoh makes he interprets Joseph's dream very well, and Pharaoh makes him the viceroy, the second in command, the vice president. He realizes that there's going to be a famine in the land, and he stores everything up. Then the famine comes. The brothers and the father and the wives all come down to Egypt to buy food from Joseph. They don't know he's Joseph. And what do when they get down there? They all bow down to him. They surround him and they bow down to him. And here you go. Joseph's dream has been realized. Joseph's dream has come true. It's not that that's what he wanted. That was the message that Hashem, the prophecy that Hashem was giving him, what was going to happen. So the brothers did something to try to stop that from happening. They took their opposite plan and sold him down to Egypt. And it was the chain of events that actually God used to bring about the exact plan that he had, which was the opposite of their plan. Okay? This is how it always works. This is how things work in life. Okay. And that's why it's very important to understand, one little kind of throwaway verse over here, which I love. A man came upon him wandering in the fields. This is when Joseph is out looking for the brothers before he meets up with the brothers. A man happens upon him wandering in the fields. And he says, what are you looking for? And Joseph says, I'm looking for my brothers. Could you tell me where they are? So the man says, oh yeah, they've gone to Dosan. So Joseph follows his brothers and he finds them in Dosan. Okay. And that's when this whole thing happens. They throw him into the pit. They take him out. But says Rashi, quoting from the Medrash, this man was the angel Gabriel. Okay. In other words, what happened? God planted one of his malachim, one of his angels, right there at that moment when Joseph's wandering around looking for the brothers, and the angel says, they're over there. And Joseph goes over there and he finds the brothers find him, they throw him in the pit, they take him out, they sell him, Ishmaelites, Egypt, Potiphar, Pharaoh, etc., etc. Okay. And the Baalei Musar, the great, philosophers of Judaism, they say that this is how we should look at every moment in our lives. Wherever you are, you're in the bank, you're at work, you're, at the supermarket, you're at home, you're talking to your wife, you're talking to your kids, whatever it is, you should look at every moment in your life as if this person right here, right now was sent to me at this very moment by Hashem. This is the malach that Hashem sent me at this moment, the angel that Hashem sent for me to learn what I need to learn right now at this second, to experience what I'm experiencing at this moment. That's the outlook that we should have, because every moment, there's these two cogs going on. There's me and my plan and carrying things out, but be open to Hashem's plan. Be open to see that Hashem has also got a plan, and his plan is going to prevail. So it just behooves me to try to hook up with his plan to the best of my ability, and to understand that everything that's going on in my life at every moment is just part of that grand plan. I just want to say we have just a couple of minutes left. There's something really, really odd that takes place in this Parsha, and that is we're learning the story of Joseph, and all of a sudden, stop. God slams on the brakes, completely cuts the story off. Chapter 38 tells us this whole long story about Judah and how he had three sons, and the three sons, they all died, and Tamar, his daughter-in-law, pretended to be a prostitute, and Judah, not knowing that it was his daughter-in-law, consorted with the prostitute, and she had twins, and this whole long story. And then the story ends, and boom, it picks right up again with the story of Joseph. The whole Judah and Tamar story, which we'll study in depth one year, is a literary island in the middle of the Joseph story. Why does God, when he writes the Torah, stop right in the middle of the Joseph story, give us the Judah and Tamar story, and then go back to the Joseph story? It's incredible. It's an incredibly puzzling thing. And I'll just share with you, just for a few minutes, we'll spend 5 more minutes and we'll wrap it up. There's a medrash that talks about what was going on over here. The brothers were occupied with the sale of Joseph. Okay, the brothers, the tribes, they're trying to get rid of Joseph. Joseph is occupied with his sackcloth and fasts because he's been sold into slavery and he misses his father. Jacob was occupied with his sackcloth and fasts because he lost his son. He thought he was never going to see him again. Judah is occupied with marrying a woman. He's trying to get married and have children, right? And all this time, everything that's going on, the Almighty was occupied with creating the light of Mashiach. What does this mean? What does it mean that Hashem is trying to create the light of Mashiach? It's exactly what I'm talking about. There's always two stories going on in our own individual lives and in the Torah. There's the micro story, the story of Joseph and the brothers, and then there's the macro story. What is Hashem bringing about? What's in my life and in the world and in the Torah? What is the big picture story? Okay, so where does Mashiach come from? Mashiach. Who's Mashiach? Mashiach is the descendant of King David, who will ultimately restore peace and universal awareness of God's oneness and God's presence. He's the king. He's a descendant of the kingdom of David. Where does he come from? His genealogy. He comes from a union between Ruth and Boaz. Okay, fine. Ruth and Boaz. We'll go into it in more depth another time. But where does Boaz come from? Okay, so take a look at this. This is in the end of the book of Ruth. This is the line of Peretz. Peretz begot Chetzron. Chetzron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nachshon. Nachshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. Okay, so David comes from Boaz. Mashiach is a descendant of David, which means that Mashiach comes directly from Boaz. And Boaz is a direct descendant. His great grandfather is Peretz. Who's Peretz? Well, I'll tell you who Peretz is. Go to the story of Judah and Tamar, and we see that after Judah has relations with his daughter-in-law, mistaking her for a harlot, she ends up giving birth to twins. And one of these twins is Peretz. Okay, so what's going on in the Judah and Tamar story? The story of Joseph is all about the Jewish people going down to Egypt. Okay, and not just going down to Egypt, but beginning the whole saga of 4,000 years of exile. But we have a general rule that before something difficult or bad happens in history, God first puts the remedy, the cure for that malady into place. We see that famously in the story of the Megillah in the book of Esther, where before Haman rises to power, first Mordechai overhears big son and Zeresh plotting to kill the king, and it's recorded in the book of the king that Mordechai saved the life of the king. Now when Haman comes to power, it's already been recorded. Oh, perfect. It's already been recorded in the book of the king's journals that Mordechai saved his life. So the refuah, the cure, is put in place before the makkah, before the malady, before the illness, so to speak. That's exactly what's going on over here. You understand? The Jewish people are about to go into exile, into Egypt. Not just exile of Egypt, but all the exiles are about to start now. When does exile end? When Mashiach comes. So before the Jewish people, right before Joseph goes down into Egypt, God stops, creates a little literary island called the story of Judah and Tamar, because the end of the story of Judah and Tamar is the birth of Peretz, which is where Boaz comes from, which is where David comes from, which is where Mashiach comes from. And now that the seeds of Mashiach have been planted, now we can pick up and go right back to the story of Joseph being sold into Egypt, beginning the story of the exile of the Jewish people in Egypt and all the future exiles, because the seeds of Mashiach have been planted. The refuah, the remedy, has been put in place. Now the exile story can begin. So that is how that all fits together. And that is Parsha Unpacked by Vayeshev. There's so much more to say. It's an incredibly heavy-duty Parsha, but that's what I wanted to share for tonight. And if anybody wants to jump in now, they certainly can. You can ask questions, share comments, thoughts, or you can jump off, and that's fine too.
Thanks, David. That was awesome.
My pleasure, Sherry. Oh, you're coming back soon. Yay, we can't wait to see you. What's going on?
I thought I was no, that was great. I thought I was going to be with my sister and brother on Zoom, and we postponed it.
But I'm here, David.
Yeah,
Oh,
Al's
hi,
here.
Al. Okay. That's great. Great to see you guys.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hi. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments, insights?
Toda Rabah.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did Jacob know that he should tell Joseph to go look for his brothers?
Well, that's a good question. Was that Irv, by the way, who asked that?
Yes, it is.
Okay, fine. That's a really good question. I think that's part of the point over here, which is that he may not have. In other words, that was his moment of confusion. That was because if you said to him afterwards, Jacob, what exactly were you thinking at the moment when you said Joseph to go look for the brothers? He probably would have said, you know what? I have no idea what came over me. That was probably the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I should have known that the brothers were angry and wanted to kill him. We're going to throw him into the pit or whatever. And now I'm not going to see my son for, he thought, ever. So I don't think he would have. I don't think it was a conscious thought. I think that was a moment of befuddlement where God takes advantage of that moment of befuddlement to put a thought into his mind or to allow him to choose to do something which he never would have done had he been consciously thinking about it in a logical way.
Rabbi,
Seymour.
what's chus that Judah and Tamar have to become the progenitors of Mashiach?
Well, that is a great question. Yehuda had, first of all, Yehuda had a lot of schus. So Yehuda was, the one that wanted to save Joseph, right? And also, he was the head of the tribes. He was, he was the tribe of Malchus, the tribe of kingship, and he was the fourth of Leah's sons. And when she had him, she said, "Pam ani odes Hashem." This is now I have gratitude and I thank Hashem because she recognized his special qualities. And Tamar was a righteous woman. She was a extremely modest woman and a very holy person. And they had together, even though it happened in this really kind of seemingly inappropriate way, they were destined to bring about the seed of Mashiach. The whole Mashiach lineage is incredibly fascinating. We've gone through it a million times before, and we can do it again another time, but that's just one of the many sordid stories that goes into the lineage of where Mashiach comes from. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions?
Rabbi, this is Yasher Koch on a great Devar Torah.
Thanks for
Thank you so much.
sponsoring.
And I just wanted to bring up one point and maybe have you elucidate on it and crystallize it. But it's my understanding that the brothers took the pieces of silver, I think it was 20, and they bought shoes with the money. Have you heard this before?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's my understanding the shoes. All
Say
right.
it again. It's your understanding that what?
The shoes are kind of a metaphor because what does the shoe do? It protects you from the earth, from the land, right? Protects your feet. And I heard something interesting from Rabbi Kreisman that originally Esau was assigned the task of fighting immorality and evil in the world, but Esau had free will, according to Rav Dessler, talks about this, and he went the wrong way. And when Joseph was born, Joseph got assigned that task. And actually, Jacob leaves Laban after Joseph is born. He leaves his household. And what Joseph represents, one of his strongest mitos is fighting. He doesn't fall in for all the sexual immorality that existed in Galus, in Mitzrayim. He shows that with Potiphar's wife. He's a model. To the other Yidden. And in fact, they talk about the merits of the Jews in Mitzrayim. And one of them is that they didn't buy into the sexual immorality that was prevalent. So I don't know. Those are just some thoughts I had. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can really crystallize them, but.
Yep. Very nice. Very nice.
Rabbi, would you please tell your mother about how Hashem befuddles people for his own will? I mean, it would really be helpful to blame this all on Hashem, the way my mind works. Okay.
So try.
I'm staying out of that. That's
Oh man.
Great try.
all right, everybody. Thank you. It was fun. See you all, God willing, next week. Continue the story.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi
Thank
David. That was
you.
awesome.
Very good.
Thanks,
Bye, bye, bye,
everyone.
bye, everybody.
Yoda.
Everybody.
Bye.